All right, so welcome back to Taste Kitchen. Today we are going to do something very special. We're actually going to do some virtual wine tasting, and we're going to do it in our Wine Lab series right here on Taste Kitchen. Listen, we're going to have one of the best minds in the wine business, Mr. Dan Pilkey, join us to taste each and every one of these wines. I want to welcome to the show, Dan Pilkey.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so Dan, all right, so let's kind of get into a little bit about Paul Hobbs Winery. These are the three beautiful, succulent bottles that you have sent us today. And we're going to do a taste on a Chard, a Pinot Noir, and of course, a Cabernet. Let's learn a little bit about Paul Hobbs and kind of tell me about the winery. How are things done there at that great facility?
Paul has definitely been a pioneer in the industry. Started this brand in 1991, and since then has just been an international visionary. We're on 4 continents making wine right now, and it is such an exciting time to be a part of the team. He has been coined the Steve Jobs of wine by Forbes magazine, and really it is a new endeavor in New York and Spain with our 2 projects launching this year and then 2021. So there's a lot of things on the horizon, but back at the headquarters in California, there is some great vintages that are going to start hitting the shelves. So tonight we're going to taste a couple of those.
Yeah, very cool. Dan, so your role with the winery, kind of talk to us a little about your background and also kind of where you are in your wine journey.
Right. So I had started in hotels and restaurants years ago, probably about 20 years ago. And I've always been sommelier on the floor, working with wine programs and my colleagues throughout California and also here in Chicago now. I joined the Paul Hobbs team about 2 years ago, and I currently conduct the Midwest for sales and work with our local distributor partners and host events, tastings, education, really just all hands on deck when it comes to the sales aspect of wines.
Very cool. So as a somm, you've got a chance to taste probably some of the best wines in the world. And, I've had Paul Hobbs before, and I would rank them right up there with some of the best, especially the Chard. This is one of my favorite wines, and
Absolutely.
I've drank it many times before. When you look at kind of how wineries are competing today, because this is something, it's a very competitive market space. We're seeing a lot of American wines that are really starting to make the lists over the past couple of years, and actually more so, I think, than even the French wines and some of the European wines. Why do you think we're seeing such a resurgence here in the American vineyards?
I think the foundation has been set, and I mean education, sharing information to give the rise of extraordinary talents in winemaking feats in a short amount of time. Our culture is not as deep as the French. However, we have come such a long way. So I think to your point, yes, we have definitely seen some amazing vineyards and varietals, Chardonnay being one that's grown all over the planet. But in California, it is expressed so beautifully, and we have so many different versions of it, quite frankly. Ours at Paul Hobbs, I think, is both classic and timeless and ethereal. It's absolutely beautiful. I always say, if you want to tickle Paul, you tell him he makes good Chardonnay.
Yeah. I like that. That's one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that California, just the growing seasons, the climate, and just also the soil. And I've been to many vineyards throughout California, and in my opinion, the perfect wine for California is the Chard. Even though I know a lot of people argue that the Pinot Noir is the perfect wine for California, but in my opinion, I would go with the Chard. So it's great to see that you guys are doing such a great job with this one. Let's kind of also jump into these three. I want to kind of just introduce each one of them that we're going to be tasting today, and I'll let you kind of roll into that. Tell me a little bit about the Chard. Not too much, because we want to don't let our audience learn too much too fast. A little bit about the Chard.
So the Chardonnay is the 2017. It is from Russian River Valley, Sonoma, and it is comprised of a few of our estate vineyards to make this appellation wine from Paul Hobbs. It is a barrel fermentation and barrel aged, and this, in my humble opinion, echoes just the charming and almost holistic way in
Yeah.
which Chardonnay can be presented.
Very cool. All right, let's jump to the Pinot Noir. Also another favorite of mine. Just love this vineyard or this vintage. Tell me a little bit about that one.
So this is my personal favorite, Paul, is the Pinot Noir from Russian River as well. And similarly to the Chardonnay, it's a collection of our estate vineyards that create a benchmark hallmark flavor of Pinot from Russian River. And we'll get into the flavors more in depth in just a second. But I think this wine is the example of what Pinot from this appellation of Russian River should taste like. There's so
Very
much
cool.
technique that goes into it. It is absolutely beautiful.
Cabernet, a bold wine. I've got some very favorite vineyards. I won't use too many names, but Rombauer is one that comes to my mind. I like what they're doing out there. How does this one hold up to, say, a Rombauer Cabernet?
Cab is king in Napa Valley, of course. And, we started the venture with Paul Hobbs in Sonoma, and we've recently broke ground in Napa Valley. So we have an extraordinary vineyard that we're working with. And so this cab is a deep reflection of a site called Coombsville. And when you get this in the glass, you'll understand it has the power, it has the shoulders, it has the fruit. It is an absolute stunning effort from one of the masters of Cabernet, which is Paul Hobbs.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. I want to hear a little about, we were talking about this pre-show, and that is virtual wine tastings, kind of what we're doing here, obviously under the COVID-19 situation worldwide. This has become kind of a thing where somms and people of all walks, including chefs and consumers, have really kind of gone to the aspect of virtual wine tasting. What are you seeing in terms of these trends? I'm going to open the bottle while you kind of give us a breakdown on that.
Absolutely. So this has been a tremendous soar in popularity. The virtual wine tastings that are being conducted now allow the audience a stream of information that wasn't accessible earlier. And what I mean by that is winemaker dinners or just wine dinners in general would be completely an auditory sense. You'd have your dish in front of you and you would listen to a presenter. And if you're lucky enough to have a great orator and presenter give that information, you're satisfied, maybe even elated at how good they are. With the virtual, we can link in tons of visual information, videos, drone footage, all sorts of things that really give the audience a lot more context into what it is we're tasting, and even answer those questions. Why is this like this? Why is this taste associated with this technique? So there's so much that we can embed into the virtual experience that we couldn't do in a normal restaurant or even just, wine tasting setting.
Right.
And the second part of that, I think, is the comfortability aspect. So for years, we've talked about sommeliers could be snobby, or the wine industry has a bit of snobbish sense to it, especially when people don't know about wine, what to do, what not to do, how to taste, those type of things. When consumers, sommeliers, wine aficionados, anybody is in the comfort of their own home, it's very nice and reassuring that they ask the questions they do. They seem very calm, they're comfortable. So I think that the virtual setting in the comfort of their own home has furthered our conversations. They're deeper, they're more meaningful. And at the end of the day, the audience is so much more engaged. I've never seen anything like it.
That's very cool. I could see that being a factor. Do you think this is something that is going to kind of hold in the industry even once we get past COVID over the next year or two? Do you feel like virtual tastings could kind of become an evolution of how wine education is done?
That's the magic question right now. And if I had to peer into my little, 8-ball here and shake it up, I'd probably say that it does look like it's going to be a combination of the on-premise restaurant working maybe a little bit less seats in the restaurant, but they're coupling that with these virtual experiences because they still find a way to engage and reach out to their audience and their fans. And that's much needed right now. And I think that's through that creative side that we're really going to galvanize and do everything we can to keep businesses afloat, and then just keep people excited about the food and wine industry.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we've opened this beauty right here. We're going to go ahead and get a nice pour here. And I want to talk a little bit about this particular wine. And this is one that I have found, and I've tested this a few different times with different temperatures. And I've played with this at my home and here in the studio of introducing this wine at different temperatures. I want to hear your thoughts on what is the perfect temp for this wine.
I love this wine singing right about 58 to 62, which may seem like a small margin, but it's at that high 50s, low 60s at the end of the day.
Okay.
If your refrigerator is in at 43, 44,
Yep.
hold it in the refrigerator, and I call it the 20-minute rule. Just take it out, let it sit for 10, 20 minutes kind of thing, and then pull
Right.
the cork. One thing that temperature does do is as it warms, it becomes slightly more aromatic and it lets that fruit come forward. So for me, those slightly warmer than refrigeration temperatures will garner more flavor, aroma, and I think that's really important in the Chardonnay. And you can smell it. This thing is singing. I mean, it has so
Yeah.
much expression to it because at the end of the day, I think this wine demonstrates so much technique that is part of the Paul Hobbs DNA, but it also speaks to just how to treat your vineyards and your fruit really well to make great Chardonnay. So there's a lot of things going on here. It's a barrel fermentation and barrel aged product. And some people might say, I don't like oaky wine. This
Hmm.
wine is barrel fermented and barrel aged, but honestly, the oak is so well integrated that it's just seamless and harmonious.
Well,
That's the magic.
yeah, I like it. I think you're right because that's the thing that I have found with this particular wine is if you go up just a couple of degrees once that it's at room 10 or once you bring it out into the room, I have found you're right. The aroma, just the flavors seem to really jump out at it. What was interesting is my wife called this out to me because we were serving this particular wine right here, and we had kind of got off on a conversation and then poured it. And she said, wait a minute, this tastes a little different. And that was what it kind of spawned the process of, I'm like, hey, well, it's just a hair warmer than what it was in a typical pour when you want to try to get a Chardonnay in the glass. All right, so let's get into some tasting notes here. Let's do a quick sip.
Oh,
Never disappoints.
it never does. No, I think
I
this
love
is
that one.
again the technique and
Beautiful.
the texture of wine here is just undoubtedly Chardonnay, which I think is just beautiful. And for that reason, I am in the pumice and pomaceous fruit camp. So that pear, it's very ripe.
Yep.
There's just a touch of kind of this nectarine, golden peach aspect. And then there's this, if you smell it too, this floral sense to it. It's kind of jasmine,
what
white flowers.
There you go. Okay, so I was trying to figure out what floral aroma am I getting here? Now
Chardonnay,
where
whether it's Burgundy or California or Australia, I think Chardonnay always has this incredibly restrained floral side. It's not Gewürztraminer, but then again, it does have this very subtle white flower character to it that is
Right.
just beautiful.
Yeah, the nose is really what I think is one of the favorite parts of the wine tasting experience. I don't know if a lot of people really kind of give that as much credence as they should, is that it just seems to kind of expand on what your expectations are on the wine itself once you get it in your palate. And the taste on this one is pretty amazing. Okay, so there's one thing I noticed with this wine is it has almost a buttery texture on the back end.
Sure.
Why is that?
So we do a process in which we call malolactic fermentation. It is associated with many winemaking techniques for Chardonnay and even other varieties, but for the most part, just creating that extra sense of texture and viscosity in the wine is kind of paramount to I think the descriptor of Chardonnay. And the trick, all right, where the rubber hits the road, is that you have to make sure that that's in balance and it doesn't drive the conversation too much. We want to have that
Yeah.
as you mentioned, it's in the back a little bit. It's just a nice
Yep.
finish component that lets you know there is body and that there is structure. And when all these things combine, I call that the case for complexity. And when
Okay.
people give a score to a wine, when they say, oh, this is 100 points or 95 points, we would like to think and say that it's because of all these little subtleties and factors that end up creating a value or a prized wine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is a 93 pointer, so obviously it's holding its own out there in terms of the market. When you look at operators and chefs or restaurant concepts that would be going with this wine, what are you finding in terms of the trends of where this wine is being consumed at the food service level?
Oh my gosh, everything from white tablecloth restaurants into high-end fine dining, because of what you mentioned regarding texture, finish, and flavor. The wine is suitable for food pairing, all
Right.
the way up to the entree level. Some people do think of Chardonnay or even white wine in general as being appetizer driven. And sure, this wine can work on that level, but the complexity of main course dishes and more full throttle flavors, Chardonnay can balance those and work with them harmoniously very easily.
Yeah. When you look at, you mentioned some food pairing, and that's something that I think a lot of people, when you look at whether it's the consumer level or even at the entry level restaurant operators, whether it's a casual operation or maybe it's an independent restaurant that's just getting into maybe a little bit higher wine list in terms of price and value. Pairing becomes a thing, and it's really kind of that next step of moving both your menu and also your value proposition to a consumer or a guest up a notch. What is it that you would say when you look at this particular wine in terms of pairing? Has there been anything that's really successful that's like this is the home run package for the Paul Hobbs Chardonnay?
For me, it's always been seafood, and just on Mother's Day, I made a smoked shellfish tower for my wife, or not really tower, but just a single step because I don't have the cool, tower formats. But getting scallops, mussels, clams, Dungeness crab, lobster, and getting that smoky barbecue flavor on them, so it's cooked all the way through, and then pairing with Chardonnay from Paul Hobbs was spectacular. You also have the ability to go to foods like halibut and salmon, as those seafood flavors are just a perfect pairing for the white wine. Poultry, of course, when you get into the chicken and pork, can work as well. I think in those recipes, you're looking for a sauce to bridge maybe the divide or the gap, and even the
Right.
cooking method, whether that's a sous vide or oven roasted, things like that would come into play. I think
Yeah.
to your point too, it makes the restaurant or it makes the business when they're serving these things and they match. It gives the customer and clients the sense that people are listening and they care, right?
Right.
It shows that they're
Yep.
totally engaged in what's happening. And I think that builds confidence. And I think it provides that perceived value when people go out and they spend money.
Yeah. Well, and that's going to be a big issue as we kind of break out of our quarantine here across the country. Value propositions are going to be a really big part of how we go back into hospitality. And I think the operators that figure out how to really match great wine and great food and trying to create that new experience, because listen, you're going to have fewer tables. So you're going to have to turn some higher covers and really look at kind of repositioning almost your whole strategy of how you think about wine and food together. So
Most
it's going to be
definitely.
interesting to see how that moves forward. All right, so let's get moving into our next wine, which is the Pinot Noir, your favorite.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about this one while I crack the cork on this guy.
So this Pinot Noir is from the Russian River, as I mentioned, and it embodies about 8 vineyards that are all throughout the corridor of Russian River. So this is important to me very much because I think it really drives the conversation of what Russian River soil and climate is to Pinot Noir. And when we look at the Sebastopol and Gold Ridge series soils, we are talking about a really nice clay, loamy minerality that is the backbone of the wine. And then what I think Russian River stands for is this incredible kind of baked or dried sweet and sour cherry strawberry note. And
Oh,
that is
okay.
completely framed by cinnamon stick and the sweet spice, even black pepper kind of tones to it. And when you look at the wine, it's not this super see-through, watery, thin wine. And it has a good sense of color and flavor it is absolutely the benchmark for the Russian River. I'd put this against any producer in the world. I think it's one of the best out there. It speaks to a great sense of terroir for Russian River Valley.
I like that. And of course, when you look at Pinots, because this is, of course, the wine that made California,
right,
kind of put California on the map, just the Pinot Noir itself. All right, so this is another great color, which is for most Pinot lovers, you have Pinot lovers that kind of love that pale, I won't say rosé, but it has a pale, visual. And this one, of course, has a deeper one. It's almost akin to a Cabernet. Why are we getting this deep, much deeper color in this wine?
So I think this wine shows a bit more coloration to it due to the healthiness of the fruit in which we get. There is thick, robust, and flavored skin development on all of our berries. There's no disease pressures that are in the vineyard sites, and the wine is just so clean and ethereal. We get a great extraction process during our winemaking. It's, of course, 100% Pinot. We don't add anything. And for that reason, we do just make a little bit more brighter or more colored Pinot. I think that sometimes we have to remember that there is twofold in a wine. There's a sense of terroir, great, but there's also a process to it as well. And sometimes process can net results that are thicker, richer, lighter, you name it. We walk a very fine balance between not too light, not too heavy. I think this is a thin-skinned varietal like Pinot is, but it also has a sense of flavor to it as well, because we don't want to have the wine taste like nothing, of course. We have, we've got plenty of flavor in here. When we get to the Cabernet, you'll see a much more increase in pigment and color. But to the Pinot, I think it just is that special place of richness. And again, could this carry entrees? Absolutely. Could I enjoy this on my back porch when the weather finally gets nicer in Chicago? Of course, just on its own, it's quite lovely.
Yeah. All right, so I'm picking up some herbal elements here, which gives it a very interesting, not only aroma, it's kind of that sweet and sour kind of approach. Talk to me a little bit about what I'm getting here on this particular
So we use a
taste.
combination of some whole berries and some whole clusters in the winemaking process. And those whole clusters that are intact really give us this amplified aroma. I pick it up as black tea. I pick it up a little bit as cinnamon sticks and black pepper spice. Even like rose petal tea can be very floral and kind of jumpy in that expression, right? Kind of lifts from the glass very easily. And even I use a glass like this, and I can see you're very similar with these kind of rounded edges to it, and then it tapers up. And that really exacerbates that kind of aroma and style and bouquet from the wine. So I think the glassware plays an integral role in that process. But yeah, even those little hints of kind of like a bay leaf or laurel. And then there's all this bright, bright fruit. I mean, it's such a young wine. It will get better in age. I always recommend between the 3 to 7 year camp for things that are in the Russian River, which are, between young and then just starting in that secondary flavor camp.
Yeah, so being a 2017, I like the fact that you mentioned it's a bit of a young wine, but it does definitely hold its own. It's got some great pillars here to build on for sure. And I'm interested in this particular wine because this one does something that I think is intriguing on wine menus that I don't get a chance to see very often, and that is this wine starts to move between categories on a menu. And what I mean by that is if I were to get a taste from this wine on or at my table from Assam, I would probably consider maybe jumping up from pasta to maybe something that was a meat dish, because this one has a little bit of that boldness that kind of holds its own. It doesn't give it feels like it doesn't get covered up by, stronger palate issues when you look at the culinary aspect of it. Is that your thought on this?
Absolutely. This, we look at Cabernet needs to be with meat or steak. And while there's some truth in that conversation, there's no reason that we shouldn't experiment a little bit more with Pinot Noir. I think it's a very versatile grape to use. And to your point again, this wine does have a sense of backbone to it. we do night harvesting, for instance. And I think the night harvesting and that whole cluster technique that I pointed to are all things that are part of our DNA that contribute to the wine's texture, flavor, and just a little bit more seriousness of a wine.
Yeah.
So for me personally, I've done grilled pork chops and done like a cherry compote over the top.
Oh, that's perfect right there.
I mean,
there you go.
that is, yeah, that's one of the favorites. So you can go a little heavier with that. You don't have to just always think on the lighter side because it's a Pinot Noir. That said, I know it's confusing because Oregon's making wines in Burgundy and New Zealand.
Exactly.
There's no shortage of expression of Pinot. But I think consumers that have seen our Paul Hobbs labels before know that that is tried and true. It is such a classic. I mean, he's been doing it for a very long time, and Paul has done such a great job at crafting this wine. And we make single vineyards too, of course, but this is just a great expression that really imbibes Russian River.
Right, for sure. And the thing about this wine is I think because of its flexibility and its ability to kind of stretch across the menu, this could be a really good selection for a beverage director who's saying, listen, I can only get a handful of $100 bottles in here, okay? I mean, this is a $60 bottle retail, but in a restaurant, we're probably going to see a $100 to $120 price. Mm-hmm. That right there, because of the fact that it's got a flexible nature across the menu, when you do have a table that's ordering pasta and a guy over here doing a filet mignon, this would be the perfect, I think, a perfect wine to introduce and say, hey, listen, let's kind of talk about why this wine works and why you should spend that extra $20 to get something that really is going to work with everybody's palate and also with what they're doing at the table itself. So it's not locked into one particular area.
And we try to appease more than one person at the table, right? I'm always, my wife and I are always kind of like, well, what do you want? What do you want? And sometimes this can hit both marks. So
yeah, for sure. All right, so this is a good one. I like that one. I'm learning to, I'm a big Pinot snob, so I have my select vineyards that I've been playing with for years. I think I'm going to have to bring this one into the wine cellar and see what happens with this one.
If anyone has not had this wine, into the Chardonnay I know you love, but if anyone has not had Paul Hobbs Pinot, you have to try it. I'm telling you from sommelier experience and wine lover experience all over the globe, this has been, I think, one of the key wines that defines Pinot in California, period.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. All right. So our last but not least is going to be the Paul Hobbs Cabernet. So we're going to get into this one. Dan, tell me a little bit about this one while I pop the cork.
Well, this is my favorite so far. I've been with the company for a few years, and I've tasted some older vintages. I've tasted the most recents out of 2014 and 15. And the 2016 it just needs to be on stage with lights glowing. This is the wine for Cabernet fans for sure. So it is Napa Valley 2016. This is a leap out of the glass with blueberry and cassis. It has this dark fruit profile that's so expected in a way. But what makes it special is that the 2016 vintage really polishes that flavor to the next level. It is so just seamless and balanced. It was something that Mother Nature kind of did for us. And I think alongside the Paul Hobbs winemaking team, the way in which we grow our fruit, and then mostly the fruit from this vineyard is in Nathan Coombs, which is in Coombsville, Napa Valley, right outside of the downtown area. And it's a geological, oddity with different types of soil structures and series. Yeah. This just expresses so much. So there's floral notes here that have that thyme, sage kind of aroma to it. There's all this dense cassis and blackberry notes. And then to the hallmark Cabernet lovers of pencil shavings and graphite, it comes through as well. So there's so much going on, and it's a young wine. People in my region, all over the Midwest, that is, I've done so many tastings, and the first thing out of their mouth is, this is so drinkable now. How does he do it? And that's a great question. I don't know. It's one of the signature things about Paul's winemaking and the team's winemaking that's really special. Can you drink this now? Yes. However, even if you have the patience to wait that 2 to 3 year mark, you will be rewarded. Absolutely.
All right, so on the nose, this one you can just feel the density of this wine.
Yes.
This one is like, get ready, buddy. You're gonna get a treat here. I love this. What else am I picking up here in terms of this kind of, I don't know, is it blueberry, blackberry? There's a berry in there.
I think it's always on the black side. And if you think about kind of this mint leaf mixed with blackberries, because they kind of have that little leafy green edge to a blackberry, that imbibes Cabernet to the fullest. I think there's also a little touch of red fruit in there, kind of like a sour red cherry, Bing cherry. But mostly, I'd say 2/3, is in the black fruit camp for sure. But look at the finish. It's so expansive in the front, but in the back, it makes you kind of pucker a little bit. Mm-hmm. And there's great acid that really balanced the tannin profile of the wine. I think the struggle with Cabernet is to manage tannins. And I believe that is done both in the vineyard and in the winery. It's something the team works, night and day on. And this is a vintage that just has such a tremendous balance to it.
Talk to me a little bit about the soil that this grows in, because this has a little bit of an aroma that just feels like there's something very earthy here.
Yes.
What is bringing that in?
So Paul was consulting for a winery years ago, and he stumbled across a region called Coombsville. And Coombsville has a little magic to it in the sense that it has deposits from the Napa Valley River, which give this alluvial and fluvial soil content, in addition to this volcanic nature that comes out of the Vaca Range on the east side of Napa. And as these two soil series converge, they bring such a unique flavor to wine and Cabernet Sauvignon in general. So I think this wine has that volcanic obsidian blackness and grip to it. And then there's this plush, like relaxed velvet thing that happens because of those alluvial materials in the soil. When I think of sparkling mineral water and I drink the sparkling mineral water and the finish has that little mineral kick to it, that's what this 16 really brought forward for me personally. I think there's a little spark under it. And that's the beauty of drinking wine.
I would agree. This one seems to get even more aromatic as you let it breathe too. I don't know. It just seems to open up a lot more.
Okay, so this is the fun part, right? You just opened these, and I've had this mine open for just about an hour now. I did a couple experiments because I live and breathe in wines, but I've had all these wines fresh. I've drunk about half the bottle, put the cork in, and left it for at least one day. Went back to it, and the wine is bulletproof, absolutely stunningly gorgeous. That's I think the trademark of just beautiful wines. They will get better with more air. They do last 48 hours. And that is the fun part about kind of doing those little trials. So don't be afraid to come back to that tomorrow sometime, or even later tonight. You will be rewarded. So it will even gain in complexity and aromatics and such. Yeah.
Dan, let's go into some, first of all, this is a wine that I think, it's amazing, but one thing that I think is interesting about this one is I think it punches way above its weight class.
Most definitely.
This wine right here, I think, holds its own with some $250 bottles out there that I've seen. One, in its complexity, but I love the flavor profile that it brings to the glass, and it also has just a unique framework in terms of how all of it's put together. It's almost like this thing was genetically engineered to say, okay, let's hit this mark, let's hit that check mark, let's hit this check mark. It's really going across the layer in terms of a great wine and what you need to have it in place. So that's good. Congratulations on what you guys are doing there. I want to jump to some tips, because when we look at operators who may not have a som on staff, and they're looking at a beverage director or maybe a bartender who needs to have a little bit of wine knowledge, a little bit of kind of just some backbone tips that they can help provide the servers with to kind of elevate that wine experience, because not everybody's going to have a som like you. on staff. What are some things that you would recommend in terms of tasting once a bottle is opened like this? Because I have a process. I let it breathe a bit. I get the nose. I do a small taste, then I swirl. It's all, for me, it's a method. But what is your recommendation for a bartender or maybe a beverage director to kind of help amplify the whole experience in terms of the tasting side of this?
So I say keep it simple and don't try to be someone that you're not. I think the beauty of loving wine and even food in the industry is following your growth and maturity. So let's start with the very basic. I say FEW, name a few things. It's my acronym that I use: fruit, earth, and wood. And if you're at a table and you're describing a wine to a guest or a colleague, we don't want to hear you wax on for 25 minutes about 60 different fruits that come from the grocery store. You kind of want to narrow it down to a concise couple things. And so by remembering the acronym FEW, name a few things about it. What's my fruit? Is it black or red? Is it a mix? What's my earth? Is there earth? Maybe there's not. Maybe it's completely fruit driven or floral. And then lastly, is there any wood spice that comes from maybe the barrel aging process, or as old wines start to develop more chocolate and espresso flavors, perhaps? Who knows? So if you remember that, you're in a very good position. And then the other thing that I would say is sometimes we don't pay enough attention to the condition of those flavors. So is the fruit fresh? Is it dried and stewed? Are the flowers desiccated and wilted and it smells more kind of, decaying? Or are those flowers fresh and vibrant, almost like a hibiscus flower? And when you start to attach the condition to one or two flavors, you can be in and out. You sound completely perfect sentence structure and you get your point across. And I think that builds more maybe assurance or clout than trying to overdo it. Right. And I think it's important for people that are learning to taste and do those things. Basically, find your voice, but be honest with yourself, too.
That's a good tip. I like that approach, especially to operators that are, either they're just getting into really elevating their wine menu above $50 a bottle, which I think is going to be a big factor in the recovery here for a lot of mid-level independents to fine dining restaurants, is they're really going to have to amp up their beverage sales to be able to raise these checks, because we're going to have fewer of them, and just to be able to stay in business, which I think people who are out for those experiential dining occasions, they're going to be ready for that. I think they're willing to step up and pay for high quality product. They're willing to step up and pay for that high quality experience. But if you're going to do it, you've really got to kind of raise your game a little bit in reference to really bringing in wines like what you guys have here from
I would
Paul
add
Hobbs.
to it, one of the secrets too, don't be afraid to role play. Bring your team along at the table and be a guest and put them on the spot a little bit. What do you say?
Yep.
And look at some of the mannerisms or language they use, and give them some good pointers, make them feel comfortable, build their self-esteem up, build the team up, and practice makes perfect. And sometimes that is very helpful and insightful for owners, operators, to see what really is being said at the table side, right?
Yeah. And I see a lot of, when we're on set in restaurants around the country, it's interesting because, before a shift starts, there's usually a family meal, there's usually a big gathering, everybody kind of talks about the menu items, kind of gets everybody on cue for the night. One thing that I don't notice as much, but I'm starting to pick it up in some of the locations that we've been filming at, is now they're bringing in elements around how to bring out the wine list and really get more strategic on whether it's the pairing, the offerings, the types of wines they're bringing to the table, obviously the brands. That's an interesting approach. I think we need to see more operators doing that, especially in prepping their team and getting ready to go to the floor, especially under the considerations, because you're going to have a fewer client list. They're going to be much more demanding. They're going to be much more discerning in terms of great quality products. All those kind of things are going to factor into somewhat of a different experience coming out of COVID-19 for sure.
Absolutely.
So that's a different one. All right, so Dan, last topic, and that is virtual wine tastings. So chefs and somms are doing this. We're of course doing it here in our studios. And we've talked a little bit about this, but it seems like the process could be a little bit complex. I'm kind of curious, of all the virtual wine tasting that you've watched, seen, or participated in, What have you seen that works? Because you mentioned things where you're bringing other elements, video footage from like what we've done here on our own virtual wine tasting, footage from the vineyard. But can it work inside my kitchen with me and my bev director for my local restaurant here in South Florida?
It absolutely can. There is no shortage or lag in reaching out to your audience. And I think the key takeaways, for instance, Paul Hobbs, has been doing a number of tastings with consumers virtually, with distributors to do education work, even with wine critics and the media, which has been extremely helpful. Our winemaking team is also engaged. Myself for the regionals are engaged at consumer levels and restaurant levels. It's just been just a storm of getting online because people are thirsty for it. Pardon the pun.
Oh yeah,
and
no doubt.
What's been successful is about 3 different versions, essentially. You can purchase the products from a local retailer, take them home, and then sign into the virtual experience, and we all kind of taste together on what people have in their glasses. We give a little overview of the history or maybe some information specifically about the winemaking process and make that a easy, fun 30 to 45-minute tutorial on the wines. The second part, which has been the reintegration of restaurants kind of during this COVID. So I'm currently working with a restaurant in Chicago by the name of Reclaimed, and we've teamed up to do a Chef and Somm event. So Memorial Day weekend, they're going to be selling food kits to go. You can bring them home and, cook out with the family. In addition, you can buy the bottle kits. They could have single bottles or a 3-bottle to go with the courses. And then Chef and I will be on the Zoom to instruct you on what's going on with the cooking techniques or some of the flavors in the wines. And that has been absolutely a smashing success in theory too, because we're going to do it in a couple of weeks. But other versions of it have also worked. There's breakout rooms in Zoom and other WebEx and webinars that people can use. So it's almost like having 4 tops and 6 tops in a Zoom, which is kind of fun. So you get the idea of dining with your friends and family while being a part of a presentation. And that is just magical. So I think that's, kind of the new norm.
Yeah, for sure. Dan, it has been a pleasure having you here on the Wine Lab today. Thanks so much for stopping in to Taste Kitchen.
Thank you for inviting me. This is really fun. Appreciate it, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. So for all our viewers there, of course, we had the Paul Hobbs Chardonnay. We brought in the Pinot and, of course, the Cabernet. We will have a breakdown in the editorial. If you're seeing this over on YouTube, make sure and smash the like button. We love to get your feedback. And of course, if you're catching it over on Foodable TV, this is a great place to share content. So this is where you get a chance to really kind of push out content to your partners and colleagues in the industry. This is a great idea, I think, for your restaurant, your operation, your hotel, to maybe look at doing some virtual wine tastings and selecting some vineyards like Paul Hobbs. I think this is a great start. Make sure and stay tuned right here on Taste Kitchen, because we're going to have more great Wine Lab series coming to you with some more vineyards very soon. Stay tuned right here. We'll catch you soon.